name is Dr. Anthony Toolsher. I'm Director of Clinical Research here at START and one of the co-founders of START. START is getting close to 10 years in its existence. I originally was over at the university and at the CTRC, and then we all left the university and the CTRC and founded START. Research is critically important in oncology because despite the fact that we've made some great advances in terms of our treatment for cancer, the vast majority of solid tumors, when they're advanced, which means it's spread somewhere else, we don't have curative therapy. And in fact, many times therapy runs out and stops working. And with that situation then, the only way we're going to make progress is through clinical research. That's where new drugs that have been developed in a lab that look like they're very active in cancer enter into clinical trials or patient studies for the first time. And that's what a phase 1 clinical study is. So ultimately, every single drug that every patient has ever received has gone through this really important step.
We have a group of doctors, nurses, pharmacists, and a whole team of research collaborators that are performing phase 1 clinical trials in patients here at the START Center. We are administering drugs that are being given sometimes for the first time for patients with advanced forms of cancer who have not responded to the standard forms of treatment. We are able to offer drugs that are very new and work completely differently than some of the traditional therapies. Oftentimes, some of these drugs are being combined with standard therapies to see if the results can be more effective than with just standard treatment alone.
At one time, it was standard that we would have phase 1 clinical studies. That would be the first time a drug goes from the laboratory into patients. And we would try to find the dose and see if the drug actually worked for that patient. We'd also study whether or not the drug stayed in the body for a certain period of time. That's called pharmacokinetics. The next step of the clinical trial process is phase 2 studies. Those are very restricted. Those are limited to patients, say, that have breast cancer or lung cancer. So to qualify for those studies, you'd have to have a particular type of cancer, and you may have had to have had very little in the way of treatment. The last stage in clinical trials is phase 3. That's the comparison study. That means does this new drug compare to our old form of treatment? Is it better? Is it the same? Or is it worse? Now, the biggest change that's happened in the last 5 years is that there are now these accelerated approvals where the FDA does not expect you to go through phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. And very recently, they've approved drugs right out of phase 1. Because if the drug works, you don't necessarily need the larger phase 2 and phase 3 studies to prove that, especially if it looks like it's a true breakthrough. In fact, the FDA now has a breakthrough designation, which they will give a drug in phase 1 if it looks like it is significantly improved over the type of treatment we have. And so when people are anxious about phase 1 studies, they need to recognize not only is this the normal way we do drug development, but the key aspect is that doing it the old way of phase 2 and phase 3 may be going away, and that many drugs are going to be approved right after phase 1 if they are making a big improvement in patients' lives.
The first step is to come and see one of the doctors who specializes in the early phase clinical trials, and that can be done either through a referral from the treating oncologist. We actually receive a fair number of referrals from the patients themselves or their families. They go online, they search for clinical trials. There's a website, clinicaltrials.gov, which is sometimes helpful in identifying trials that a patient might be eligible for. Once that initial visit happens, we can talk to the patient, take a history, and figure out if there are trials that we currently have that would be appropriate for that patient. There's a long checklist of things that we have to look at to make sure that a patient is eligible. Sometimes it depends on the tumor type. We have to make sure that the patient is going to qualify based on things like blood work. Sometimes medications that they may be taking may counteract with the drugs that we're going to be giving. So there's kind of a long process that we go through. Usually it takes us a week or so to kind of go through that. And of course we want to give the patient time to review the information to decide if they want to participate or not.
patients have to feel comfortable that they are looking for something more, that they truly say, I am not ready to give up, and then have their doctor make that referral to one of us. We are not really the first choice for standard of care, but we hope that we're the first choice when people are looking for a clinical trial of a new or innovative medicine.
The scope of cancers is different across the world. There are cancers that are common in the US but are not common in Asia. For example, liver cancer, stomach cancer are much more common in Asia. They're very uncommon in the US and in Western Europe. So in order for us to really study and understand cancer as best as we can, it has to be a global effort. If you're trying to study a drug for liver cancer, you're not going to have very much success in the US because there aren't enough patients. So, we at START are proud of the fact that our cancer research is happening across the globe, not only here in the US, but in Europe and in Asia. And so we're able to potentially find patients for clinical trials that other groups may not be able to, simply because we have a broader array of patients all over the world.
When you are considering a biopsy, especially if you been told that you need to have a biopsy for cancer, you should tell your surgeon. Your surgeon, it's made easy for your surgeon to participate. Many of the surgeons in San Antonio already are signed up. They merely request a very simple box where a small portion of your tumor, before it goes into formalin, before it's fixed, but goes into this tube along with a blood sample. There's a consent, so that patients have to consent to that, but that can be delivered, and you can even sign the consent later. You don't have to sign it at the time of surgery. And once it's in there, the specimen is handled very carefully. It's frozen down, it's prepared, and ultimately it'll be shipped out. And so it's very easy on the patient, it's very easy on the surgeon. But the simple thing is to be aware of this project and also to ask your surgeon. And if your surgeon doesn't know anything about the project, we're just a simple telephone call away.
The ability to give someone hope is very important. And thankfully, we have the opportunity to offer hope when a lot of times patients don't feel that they have any other options.
And so this project's been going on for now about 3 or 4 years. We've raised a couple of $1 million. We have about halfway along. We've collected over 500 specimens and sequenced about 400 specimens. And this is quite a substantial project. And this is going to go on for the next few years because we really believe that the beauty of this is we have almost, I would say, the potential of having the largest data set of whole genome sequencing linked to a community and linked to their outcome. And so hopefully people will be able to make a better understanding of cancer, but also hopefully other people will come up for treatments that will solve cancer.